Imagine this. You wake up one morning and nothing in your life has objectively changed. The same room, the same body, the same responsibilities waiting like unmoved furniture. And yet, something is different. The air feels heavier or sharper. Your thoughts arrive already exhausted, already defensive. A quiet sentence forms in your mind before you even sit up. This is going to be another hard day. Now pause. Ask yourself something unsettling. Where did that sentence come from? Not the feeling, the words. That internal narration you didn't consciously choose yet somehow obey. You didn't test it. You didn't question it. The sentence simply appeared, and your body reacted as if it were a fact. Your shoulders tightened, your breathing shortened, your motivation quietly retreated. A future you haven't lived yet was just declared, and your nervous system accepted the verdict. Here's the paradox most people never confront. You believe you are reacting to reality, but in truth, you are reacting to language about reality. The world does not arrive inside you raw and unfiltered. It arrives labeled: good day, bad luck, failure, success, awkward, dangerous, impossible. Each word acts like a lens, and once the lens is in place, everything you see conforms to it. Imagine two people standing in the same storm. One says this is chaos, the other says this is cleansing. Same rain, same wind, entirely different inner worlds. Which one is experiencing the real storm? Or consider something closer, more intimate. Think of a mistake you made years ago. Notice how instantly a word attaches itself. Embarrassing, stupid, regretful. That word becomes a time capsule. Every time you revisit the memory, the same emotional weather returns unchanged, as if the past is still happening. Not because it is, but because the language describing it never evolved. Here's the uncomfortable question hiding beneath all of this. What if your suffering isn't caused by events, but by the words you keep using to describe them? That idea alone feels threatening, because if it's true, then something radical follows. You are not trapped by reality, you are trapped by interpretation, and interpretation runs almost entirely on language. Think about how often you tell yourself stories you never investigate. I'm bad at relationships. People can't be trusted. This is just how I am. It's too late for me. Each sentence feels like a description. In practice, it functions like a command. Your mind doesn't argue with it. It organizes itself around it. It filters evidence to support it. It rewrites memories to align with it. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, it builds a world where that sentence feels undeniably true. Not because it was true, but because you kept naming it as such. Now imagine the opposite scenario. Imagine waking up and realizing that many of the limits you feel, your fear, your hesitation, your sense of inevitability, aren't anchored in reality itself. They're anchored in repeated phrases, in metaphors you inherited, in labels given to you before you had the chance to choose your own. Imagine discovering that your inner voice isn't a neutral observer, but a sculptor. Every word it uses chisels something away or adds something permanent. This is where the tension deepens, because if words truly shape perception, and perception shapes behavior, and behavior shapes destiny, then language isn't just communication, it's architecture. It means entire lives are being built or quietly dismantled by sentences spoken casually, habitually, unconsciously. It means when you say I am, you're not merely describing yourself. You're setting boundaries around what you're allowed to become. And yet, most people never examine this power. They treat words as harmless, as symbolic, as secondary to real forces like money, biology, or circumstance. They underestimate the quiet authority of narration. Ask yourself now, honestly, who taught you the words you use to describe your life? Who decided which experiences were failures and which were lessons? Who named your fears before you ever questioned them? And the most dangerous question of all, what if the voice in your head isn't actually you? This is not a comforting line of inquiry. It destabilizes the ground beneath identity. Because once you suspect that language is shaping your reality, you can no longer hide behind innocence. Awareness brings responsibility, and responsibility demands a reckoning. Because before you can change your life, you must confront the invisible system that has been narrating it for you, silently, persistently, and with far more control than you were ever warned about. That system has roots, deep ones, psychological, philosophical, and cultural. The problem does not begin where most people think it does. It doesn't start with negative thinking, or self-talk, or even belief. Those are surface ripples. The origin lies deeper, beneath conscious choice, where language first fused with survival. Long before words were tools for expression, they were instruments of orientation. To name something was to make it manageable. To label danger was to live another day. The mind learned quickly, what can be named can be anticipated, and what can be anticipated can be controlled, or at least avoided. This is where the trap was set. Over time, language stopped being a map and started becoming the territory. Psychologically, the brain does not treat words as neutral symbols. Neuroscience shows that linguistic labels activate the same neural networks as direct experience. When you describe something as threatening, your amygdala reacts as if the threat is physically present. When you repeat a word internally, your brain assumes relevance, urgency, truth. The mind does not ask, is this accurate? It asks, is this familiar? Repetition is mistaken for reality. This is why a single phrase, rehearsed enough, can outweigh years of contradictory evidence. A child who repeatedly hears "you're difficult" does not store it as an opinion. It becomes a structural assumption. Later experiences are filtered through it. Compliments feel suspicious. Neutral reactions feel like rejection. Language becomes the unseen editor of memory itself. Philosophers noticed this long before brain scans confirmed it. Some warned that humans do not suffer because of events, but because of the meanings they attach to them. Others observed that language does not merely describe the world, it frames the limits of thought. What cannot be named cannot be examined. What is poorly named becomes misunderstood, and what is misnamed becomes destiny. But society rarely teaches you to question language. It teaches you to accept it. From childhood, words are handed down like heirlooms. Gender, success, normal, weak, strong, smart, worthy. Each term carries invisible instructions. Each one tells you what is permitted and what is shameful, what deserves admiration and what deserves silence. And here's the quiet violence of it. You inherit these words before you have the cognitive tools to resist them. By the time you are capable of reflection, the language has already colonized your inner world. It speaks with your voice. It sounds like common sense. It feels like you. This is why the hidden problem is so difficult to detect. You cannot easily see the cage when you are using its bars to think. Psychologically, this is reinforced by something called narrative identity, the story you tell yourself about who you are. That story is constructed almost entirely of words, not events, not facts, interpretations, emphases, omissions. Two people can live the same life and construct radically different identities from it, depending on the language they use to organize their memories. One says, I survived chaos. Another says, I come from chaos. Same past, different futures. Philosophically, this raises a disturbing implication. If identity is a linguistic construct, then the self is not fixed, it is editable. And that terrifies the mind, because a fixed self feels safe. Even a painful identity feels preferable to uncertainty. Words offer certainty. Labels promise stability. They draw borders around existence. This is why people cling to limiting language even when it hurts them. At least I know who I am. To loosen those words is to step into ambiguity. And ambiguity feels like danger. Society exploits this fear masterfully. Entire systems depend on predictable identities. Consumer culture, political ideology, social hierarchies. They all rely on language that simplifies, categorizes, and freezes human complexity. Once you accept a label, your behavior becomes easier to anticipate, easier to influence, easier to monetize. You stop asking dangerous questions. You stop noticing contradictions. You stop imagining alternatives. The words do the thinking for you. And beneath all of this lies a deeper philosophical wound, the human need for meaning. Language provides meaning quickly and cheaply. It turns randomness into narrative. It transforms uncertainty into explanation. But quick meaning is often false meaning. It comforts without clarifying. It soothes without liberating. This is why people defend their language fiercely, even when it cages them. To challenge the words is to threaten the meaning structure holding their world together. It feels like existential collapse. And so the hidden problem persists. Not because people are unaware, but because awareness alone is destabilizing. Language has become the invisible operating system of consciousness. It decides what feels possible, what feels inevitable, what feels forbidden. It shapes emotion before logic ever enters the room. It defines the questions you think are worth asking, and quietly deletes the ones that could set you free. Yet this is only the foundation, because once language takes root inside perception, it doesn't just influence how you think, it reshapes how you experience reality itself. And the consequences of that reach far beyond the individual, into culture, conflict, and collective fate. That is where the true cost reveals itself. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The most dangerous forces in human life rarely announce themselves. They don't arrive as catastrophes or crises. They arrive as habits, as assumptions, as sentences so familiar they feel invisible. And once language has embedded itself into perception, its consequences begin to unfold quietly, systematically, across every layer of experience. You don't notice it happening. A choice not made, a risk avoided, a truth left unspoken. Consider how quickly your mind categorizes the world before you even realize it's doing so. This person is interesting. That situation is awkward. That opportunity is not for someone like me. Each label collapses complexity into certainty. It saves cognitive effort, but at a cost, because the brain loves efficiency more than accuracy. Cognitive science reveals that once a label is applied, the mind engages confirmation bias almost immediately. Evidence that supports the word is amplified. Evidence that contradicts it is ignored, minimized, or rationalized away. The label becomes self-sealing. It protects itself from challenge. Call yourself bad at conflict, and every disagreement becomes proof. Call the world hostile, and every neutral interaction feels threatening. Over time, your lived reality bends to fit the words you keep repeating. Neurologically, this isn't metaphor, it's mechanics. Repeated language strengthens neural pathways. The more often a particular narrative is activated, the more efficiently your brain runs it. Eventually, alternative interpretations require more energy than the default story. So the mind stops exploring, possibility shrinks. This is where unseen consequences take root, not as dramatic failures, but as narrowed lives. You start choosing from a smaller menu of options. You preemptively exclude futures that don't align with your internal language. Not because they're impossible, but because they feel incompatible with who you believe yourself to be. And that belief is linguistic. This doesn't just shape individuals, it scales. Societies are built on shared language, myths, slogans, moral binaries. Words like enemy, normal, success, freedom carry emotional charge long before they carry meaning. Once embedded, they guide collective behavior without the need for constant enforcement. People don't need to be controlled if they are already narrating the world in the correct terms. History is filled with examples of how a single word can reframe entire populations. Change the language and behavior follows. Violence becomes necessary. Exclusion becomes protection. Suffering becomes inevitable. When words harden into ideology, perception becomes rigid. Nuance disappears. Complexity feels threatening. Anyone who challenges the language feels like they are attacking reality itself. And on a personal level, the damage is more intimate, but no less severe. Language shapes emotional range. If you only have crude words for your inner states, fine, stressed, angry, your emotional world becomes blunt and overwhelming. But if you have precise language, you gain precision in experience. You can distinguish between anxiety and anticipation, grief and longing, boredom and restlessness. Without nuanced words, emotions blur into noise, and what cannot be named cannot be regulated. This is why many people feel trapped inside feelings they can't articulate. The experience is real, but the language to navigate it is missing. So the emotion lingers, unresolved, looping. Now consider the most insidious consequence of all: time distortion. The words you use don't just shape the present, they rewrite the past and prescript the future. Memories are not static records. Each time you recall them, they are reconstructed through current language. If your present self describes your past using words like failure or wasted, the emotional imprint deepens. The memory grows heavier over time, not lighter. And the future? It arrives already narrated. This will probably go wrong. People like me don't get that. I know how this ends. Before anything happens, expectation sets the emotional tone. Motivation adjusts accordingly. Effort diminishes. Self-sabotage masquerades as realism. You call it intuition, it's actually rehearsal. This is why escape feels so difficult. You are not just fighting circumstances, you are refighting a script that has been running for years. A script reinforced by culture, by repetition, by neurological efficiency. And the most unsettling realization: the script doesn't need to be true to be effective. It only needs to be familiar. So the unseen consequences accumulate, not as one dramatic collapse, but as a slow erosion of agency. You feel less surprised by life, less curious, less alive. Everything starts to feel predictable. And not because it is, but because you're filtering it through language that no longer allows for surprise. Yet beneath this suffocating predictability, something restless remains. A sense that reality is larger than the words you've been given, a suspicion that you're living inside a description, not the thing itself. That discomfort is not a flaw, it's the signal. Because once you notice that words are shaping your reality without your consent, a dangerous possibility emerges. What if the same mechanism that trapped you is the one that could set you free? But freedom doesn't come from positive slogans or superficial affirmations. It requires rebellion against default language, inherited narratives, and the quiet authority of familiar words. And rebellion always begins with a rupture, a moment when you stop accepting the story as given and decide to rewrite the terms entirely. That moment is closer than you think.